What is the ideal trait? This is a difficult question. Think of the trait that you would like to have personally, above all others. What's a trait that you would like to have if you're looking for a relationship partner? Whether it's a friend, a romantic partner, or even someone in the workplace. Now, one answer to this question lies in the problems that people report having most frequently. When people talk about the problems that they have, the problems usually fall on three different levels of analysis. The first level is problems they're having personally, in terms of their physical health or even their mental health. At another level, people report having problems in their relationships. They might have stormy relationships at work. They can't get along with their coworkers. Maybe their kids are misbehaving. Or maybe they're having a difficult time getting along with their romantic partner. At a third level of analysis, we have to look at problems that people are having in terms of functioning as members of society. Sometimes people have difficulty getting along with others and obeying the laws that are set forth by society. So if we're thinking of an ideal trait, a trait that you would want to have, or that you would want other people in your life to have, let's think of a trait that's associated with the lowest level of problems on all three of those levels. And what we'll find is that the ability to delay gratification is one of the best traits that you can have. Now, studies of delay of gratification have been going on for decades. In one of the most famous studies, preschool students at Bing Nursery School, which was affiliated with Stanford University, completed a very, very simple study. This is how it went. So they were given a number of different options. They sat down and an adult talked to them. These kids were all 4 or 5 years old. And the adult said, you can have one marshmallow now, or you can wait and get 2 marshmallows if you can wait for 15 minutes. I'm going to leave the room and I'm going to leave you alone with this marshmallow. Now, unbeknownst to the kids, the experimenter left a camera in that room. And they recorded what the kids were doing. Now, the videotapes of what these kids were doing to help them delay gratification are hilarious, but they often show us how difficult it can be to delay gratification, especially when we're very young. Now, the strategies that some of the kids used were very imaginative. Some of the kids did peekaboo with the marshmallows. Other kids petted the marshmallows like they were animals to distract themselves from the fact that this was a food that they were trying not to eat. So what happened next was a big surprise. Years later, Walter Mischel, who was one of the researchers in charge of the study, began to hear stories about what was happening to these kids. And what he found was that the kids who had a better ability to delay gratification when they were very young, they tended to have better success later in life. And the nice thing is that the success that these kids were having, they were having at those 3 different levels of analysis where people report most problems. Kids who were better able to delay gratification at ages 4 and 5, they tend to have better mental health later in life. And they tend to have better physical health. If we look at the relationships that these kids had, they also tended to have healthier relationships. One way that they measured this is that kids who had a better ability to delay gratification early in life, when they followed up with them years later, they were less likely to have divorced. And at a societal level, these kids turned out to be better members of society. And one way that you could assess that is that these kids were substantially less likely to be aggressive kids. So these findings give us some insight into one important trait that we can have: the ability to delay gratification. Is self-control a uniquely human trait, or do other animals have the capacity to control their impulses? Now, this is a very simple question, but it has tremendous payoffs. And the main payoff is to see whether we evolved to have self-control. If we can see signs of self-control in lower order animals, it can give us some understanding as to whether or not this helped early humans in terms of enabling them to survive and to reproduce. Now, researchers have been asking themselves this question for several years, and they've been asking it with lots of different types of animals. The first type of animal that I'm going to talk about is one that we've seen at lots of zoos, maybe on the television. But when you look at these animals, oftentimes you might not think that they are prime examples of self-control. These animals are monkeys. Do monkeys have the capacity to regulate themselves, to delay gratification? Well, a group of researchers asked this very question. And what they did was they sat a bunch of capuchin monkeys down in front of some food. And the food was on a revolving table. Some of the food was extremely rewarding, and other food was pleasurable, but it wasn't as rewarding. And what the researchers wanted to see is if these monkeys could delay gratification, so that when they saw a mildly tempting and mildly rewarding food, if they could delay eating that food so that they could get a larger, more promising food later on. Now, as the researchers hypothesized, the monkeys were able to delay gratification. So this gives us some initial evidence that humans are not alone on the planet in terms of our ability to regulate ourselves, to delay gratification. But this isn't the only animal that researchers have looked at when it comes to self-control. Let's look at another animal that's extremely similar to us humans in terms of their genetic relatedness to us. And for this, we're going to look at chimpanzees. So what these researchers did was they got a bunch of chimpanzees and they taught them some things. Specifically, they taught them the value of various tokens. Some of the tokens had low value, other tokens had medium value, and then a third group of tokens had very, very high levels of value. Next, what the researchers did was they presented these chimpanzees with an opportunity to delay gratification so that they could take a small reward or they could delay gratification so that they could have one of the tokens worth a big reward later on. Were these chimpanzees able to do it? They were. Again, we show more signs that humans are not alone. Chimpanzees were able to delay gratification much in the same way that humans are able to delay gratification. But let's look at an animal that we might think is so dissimilar to us humans that they have no capacity to delay gratification. Let's look at rats. Now, people have a lot of different opinions about rats. One opinion is that they're very, very dissimilar to humans. But in reality, they show some similarities. And when we look at their ability to delay gratification, we find another similarity. Rats are able to delay gratification, much in the same way that humans are able to. But the similarities don't stop there. Just as you find differences across the lifespan in the ability to delay gratification in humans, you find very similar age-related differences in rats. So just as young humans often have more difficult times regulating their impulses compared to older humans, rats look very similar. The very young rats tend to have problems delaying gratification a lot more than the older rats. So all of this evidence points to a very clear conclusion that humans are not unique in their ability to delay gratification. And what this tells us is that we may have evolved to have this trait because it helps not only humans, but it helps non-human animals in terms of surviving and reproducing. How can we understand delay of gratification using the principles of neuroscience? Now, these kids in the initial delay of gratification studies that were conducted over 40 years ago, they're adults now. They've gone through lots of things in their life. But one thing that researchers have begun to do is they've begun to call them up and to ask these kids who are now adults to come into the laboratory so that they can see how their brains work. Now, the idea here is that by understanding how kids who are now adults, how their brains respond to different sorts of stimuli, how that might help us understand why delay of gratification helped predict outcomes like personal success, mental health, physical health, relationship health, and even things like aggression. So let's start by focusing on the adults who, as children, were very able to delay gratification. What they did was they took these kids and they put them in an fMRI machine. And what they did was they exposed them to a situation where they had to exert self-control. During this entire period, they recorded blood flow in the brain. Now, what the researchers found was riveting. What they found was that these adults who were better able to delay gratification, when they were presented with situations that required self-control, they had increased activation in brain regions that help people override their impulses. So it's as if these adults who are better able to delay gratification, their brains just seem to function a little bit better when it comes to helping them override their urges. But that's only half of the story. Instead of focusing all of their efforts on the adults who were high delay of gratification, they switched gears and looked at the adults who, as children, had difficulty delaying gratification. These were the kids who, instead of waiting the entire 15 minutes until the experimenter came back, some of them gobbled up that marshmallow. What do these kids look like as adults in terms of their brain activity? To answer this question, the researchers scanned these adults in an fMRI machine. And what they showed is that these adults had an overactive reward center in their brain. When they were given situations where they had to override their impulses, these adults showed increased activation in reward centers of the brain. So when you think of it, when these adults are presented with different situations that might cause them to have a desire to do something, that desire is much stronger than the desire that the other kids had. And this might help explain why these people who have a low ability to delay gratification, why they had some problems later on in life. When they were confronted with situations that were tempting, that temptation, that desire was stronger for them. Now, other research has shown very similar responses. In another study with an independent sample of participants, what the researchers did was they looked at the adult's ability to delay gratification. This time, because they were adults, they used money instead of marshmallows. And what they found was that the adults who had a better ability to delay gratification when it came to money, that their brains were actually structured differently. So that's important. It's not just how the brain functions, but it's how the brain is actually structured. So a greater ability to delay gratification in these adults was associated with having less white matter in the frontal lobes. And remember, the frontal lobes, that's where a lot of self-control goes on. So what we've learned is that neuroscience can tell us a lot about the ability to delay gratification. How people who are better able to delay gratification tend to have an overactive brain when it comes to overriding their impulses. And how people who have problems delaying gratification have an overactive reward system. And we've also seen how people who have problems delaying gratification, how their brains might even be structured a little bit differently in terms of white matter in the prefrontal cortex. Now, we've been talking about a very narrow component of self-control, delay of gratification. And we've seen how it's a very powerful predictor of success later in life in a variety of different domains. But what if we take a step back and instead of focusing on a very narrow behavioral measure of self-control, what if we think of self-control in very general terms? In terms of whether people are generally able to control their impulses or not. Will that pay off in the same way that delay of gratification does? Will having high levels of general self-control help people have better mental health, physical health, relationships, or even be better members of society? Well, researchers have asked this question in much the same way that the early delay of gratification studies did. So, in one of the most comprehensive studies to date to answer this question, the researchers followed a group of kids, over 1,000 children, from the time that they were born until the present day. When the kids were about 10 years old, they got a measure of their self-control in general. And they got it from a variety of different sources. They asked the kids, but they also asked the kids' parents and the kids' teachers from school. And what the researchers did was they combined responses from all of these different sources to give each child a single score of general self-control. Next, what the researchers did was they waited very patiently for over 20 years, and they followed up with these kids who are now in their 30s. And they wanted to see if having good self-control at age about 10, if it would pay off when these kids were in their 30s. And as the researchers predicted, having better self-control was associated with all sorts of different positive outcomes. These kids had better physical health. They also had more wealth. They made more money to the extent that they had better self-control early on in life. But in one of the most stunning results from this study, they also asked these adults if they had ever been convicted of a crime. Now remember, criminal behavior is a good marker of societal well-being. People who commit crimes are often even removed from society. They threaten society. And what they found was that the more self-control that these people had at age 10, the less likely they were to have been convicted of a crime by the time they were in their 30s. So this gives us some initial evidence that general self-control is important. But let's think of one of the most important outcomes that we can measure. It's more important than your mental health, maybe your current physical health, how much money you have in your bank account, or maybe even if you've been convicted of a crime. Mortality. Now, this is something we're all going to experience, but there are things that we can do to extend our lives. So in one of the most famous longitudinal studies ever conducted, the Terman study, what they did was they followed people over decades, and they wanted to see what were some of the best predictors about predicting a person's mortality. And what they found is that one of the most important predictors in this study of having a long and healthy life was whether or not people had high levels of self-control. Now, one question that people often ask me when it comes to self-control is if we're just talking about intelligence. Well, intelligence and self-control are related to each other, but they're not the same thing. And in fact, one thing that we can do is we can see which of these two factors is more important in predicting certain kinds of success. So one study that did this got a group of adolescents, and they measured their self-control in general, and they also got measures of their IQ. Next, what the researchers did, again, was they waited patiently. And they followed up with these adolescents at the end of the school year and got a measure of their grade point average. And what they did was they compared whether self-control or IQ was a more important predictor, a stronger predictor of how well these kids did in school. And what they found was shocking. Self-control was over twice as important in predicting end-of-year grade point averages compared to intelligence. Now put that another way, and self-control outdid IQ 2-to-1 in predicting how well these adolescents did in school. So although these results don't suggest that intelligence is unimportant, what they do show us is the importance of self-control in general in predicting various indicators of success, whether we're talking about physical health, how much wealth people have, if they're good, contributing members of society, and also if they're having success in the classroom. We've learned quite a bit about delay of gratification and how it's associated with indicators of success later in life. But now what we should do is try to use that information and apply it to our own lives. What I'd like for you to do is an activity that I call Delay Your Day. Now to do this, we're going to identify 3 different domains of your life: your work life, your family life, and then a third domain that you identify. Maybe it's a domain related to your health, such as exercise goals or your eating goals. So think of these 3 domains of your life: your work life, your family life, and maybe your health. Now what I'd like for you to do is think of some times in each of these domains when you have to delay gratification, where you have an impulse to do something, but you have to override your impulse so that you can achieve your goal within that domain. Now that you have a list at your disposal, what I'd like for you to do is to approach each of those times in those domains where you have to exert delay of gratification, and do that for 5 minutes each day. Now 5 minutes doesn't seem like a lot, but remember, self-control is fragile. It depends on a limited energy resource. So we don't want to make you mentally worn out, mentally fatigued. So when you get to the end of this activity, what I hope that you'll see is that things have changed. Whereas it was very difficult initially to delay gratification, whether it was at work or in family or in your health, now it's becoming easier because you've built up your self-control muscle. The next step is to increase the time that you're delaying gratification. Instead of 5 minutes, work your way up a little bit. Go to 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or a half an hour. What you'll notice is that it'll become easier and easier over time. the more that you practice self-control, the better you get at it. And finally, now that you've focused on these 3 domains in your life, look at other domains in your life where you might need some help. We all have self-control struggles. But now what we can do is we can use this very exercise to make us stronger in the face of adversity, so that we can persist in the face of failure. By delaying your day, you're going to have adequate strength to overcome these obstacles and to achieve your goals. Let's think of another practical activity that you can take with you to improve your self-control in your daily life. Now, in this activity, what you're going to learn how to become is a better mental energy accountant. You keep track of a lot of what you do on a daily basis. But what I would argue and what I would predict is that you rarely keep track of how each activity uses your limited supply of self-control energy. So what I'd like for you to do over the next week is every day when you are preparing your day, list the activities that you're going to do. And then next to them, list how much self-control you're going to need to do those activities. One thing that you'll notice is how a lot of your activities require very little self-control. And that's a good thing. As humans, we're naturally inclined to seek out routines, to explore things that will limit our ability and our necessity to use our limited self-control energy. But then there are going to be things that are going to require your attention and your energy. And what you want to do is you want to plan ahead so that you're not caught off guard. Studies have shown that when people anticipate activities that are going to require self-control, they conserve their mental energy very judiciously. And by conserving their mental energy, it helps them perform later on. They're better able to meet their goals. And so what I'd like for you to do is to engage in this activity over a week. List your activities every single day and how much energy each of those activities is going to take. Check in with yourself at the middle of the day and check in with yourself at the end of the day. What I expect that you'll find is that you were better able to conserve your mental energy and to achieve your goals. So this is just another example of the importance of self-control, but also how easy it is to improve. By becoming a better mental energy accountant, you'll get to the end of your day less fatigued, less worn out, but also with a greater sense of accomplishment because you will have been better able to achieve your goals.